Good morning. I'm George Abernathy with FreightWaves, and for those of you who were with us yesterday morning, we've got a lot of positive response. So backed by popular demand, we're going to provide you visibility to what sonar users have from a market expert perspective all across different modes and all the way across different geographies. So if you're looking in your booklet and you're thinking to yourself there's supposed to be some sort of panel right now, as Zach described in Sonar, we're calling an audible. We're doing a little Omaha right now, and you loved the freight experts so much yesterday, we're going to double the amount of time. We're giving you twice as much Donnie Gilbert today as we gave you yesterday. So the countdown clock is set at 2 minutes for each of these market experts. These are the folks that are available to you when you're a Sonar subscriber. These are the folks that every day at 10 o'clock Eastern Time provide the daily watch to Sonar subscribers. So today, 2 minutes each of your daily watch live. Now, I tried very hard in trying to follow Brad. I tried very hard in the few minutes here to try to find 9 robots that could actually do this, but figured out that Wally wasn't available. And so we're going to start with our favorite Australian Chief Insights Officer, who is going to talk and talks from the perspective and writes from the perspective of a number of different parts of the transportation spectrum, but speaks from the perspective of the shipper. And so our Chief Insights Officer will lead us off in his 2 minutes, Dean Crow.
Thank you, George. Good morning, everybody. I wanted to talk a little bit about the national freight market before we dive into the Atlanta market. If you can see on the screen there, you can have a quick look at where the market is sitting right now today. Outbound tender volumes, which is the shaded purple in the background, volumes are about the same this time year over year in terms of truckload freight being tendered into the market. But what you will see is that this time last year on the green line, the outbound tender reject index was much higher. Carriers were rejecting about 25% of loads and accepting the balance, which meant that they had a lot more options this time last year. Spot rates were much higher. They were a little bit higher than contract on dry, and in particular on flatbed. But as you can see, as that green line goes down from left to right, as tender rejections drop, carriers are accepting more and more loads. If they're accepting more and more loads and rejecting fewer, it's telling you that they've got less options in the market. So spot rates track right down. So the two shaded boxes tell you they've got two different markets this time. We've got a very different freight market this time compared to this the same 3 or 4 weeks last year. Spot rates are much lower on all lanes, in particular out of Atlanta. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the Atlanta market today because it's kind of an interesting market. It's the mainly because we're here, but it's also the 5th largest population. It's about 3% of our GDP. It's the 9th largest economy in the US. It's got the world's busiest airport. There's a lot of air cargo that comes in and out of here. But what's it also known for? What's the other thing that Atlanta is famous for? Traffic. Right. So as you can see here, and I'll show this up on a 1-year view, Atlanta is ranked 4th most congested city in the US, the 8th most congested city in the world. Commuters here spend on average 70 hours a year in traffic. For truckers, that's a huge deal because with ELDs now, every minute you spend in traffic at a lower average road speed, you are decreasing the amount of hours on your 60-hour clock in terms of run time. So what's happened in the last year, you can see here that wait time, which is the shaded background for dock time. So this is the amount of minutes that...
Crikey, there's your 2 minutes, Dean. Sorry about that. So we have our first victim today, and for those of you who are doing demos today, that will happen to you if you go beyond your 7 minutes. So not to put any pressure on our next expert, but Zach Strickland, for those of you who are subscribers and within the Sonar community, which I expect to grow very, very much larger here in the near term, understand that Zach was given the title a number of months ago of the Sultan of Sonar. So no pressure, Sultan, but from the carrier perspective, let's hear your insights.
Thank you, George. So from the asset-based carrier side, one of the most important things to note is market balance. So I've pulled up one of our new toys in Sonar today, the volatility market index here. So it's what it's going to do, it's going to give you a quick look at the market volatility and our various indices. The one that I have highlighted today is the head haul index volatility. And what a head haul index is measuring is the difference between the outbound loads and the inbound loads in a given market. Anytime that you have a glass of water, eventually you're going to have to pour that water out, and eventually you're going to run out. Capacity is no different. The head haul index measures the amount of water in that market in general. So when the amount of inbound loads do not increase in proportion to the outbound loads, that market is now at risk. I've pulled up a few of them here, and you see that Indianapolis and Columbus are showing green today. What that means for carriers is that they should feel pretty confident about moving into these two markets because they're getting increasing head haul values. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that volumes are increasing. It means that the proportion of outbound loads is increasing relative to the inbound loads. That's very good for carriers in general. If we pull up the chart on Indianapolis in general, we see that volumes are actually trending up as well over a longer period of time. Very important for carriers to note because these markets can pop in and pop out. In a market like we're seeing today, where capacity is much more prevalent than it was a year ago, as Dean pointed out, we want to see these longer running trends that's going to give a carrier better chances of finding additional loads out of these markets. The Indianapolis market is looking really strong. Volumes are averaging up about 15% over April right now. So carriers, look out to Indianapolis. Thanks.
Thank you, Zach. Well done. Appreciate it. A carrier of any size or type, I would love to have that kind of expertise and analysis available to me. So in our batting order today, hitting in the 3 hole, as I described him yesterday, this guy can hit to all fields. He can speak as a carrier, shipper, but most often he's writing from the perspective of an intermediary, and 2 minutes is not enough time for Donnie Gilbert. But Donnie, try to fit all of your expertise into 2 minutes for us. Thanks.
Thank you, George. So, George, every time I go to work in the mornings, the very first things I bring up our maps. Maps give me a lot of information really, really quick about what's going on in our industries. I bring up head haul maps. I bring up our tender rejections maps. And today I'm going to bring up our outbound tender market share map. And basically what this is showing us is we take a single market and all the outbound tendered freight from that market, and we divide it by all the outbound tendered freight in the U.S. and come up with a percentage. So some of our largest markets is the Ontario, California market is almost 5% of our outbound tender market share. And number 2 is actually Atlanta, Georgia. So it's kind of hitting home. So when we bring all this information up, it does not tell you that just because that it's blue, that's a higher rate. It doesn't say that it's a lower rate. The blue means that there's a lot more volume in that market, and it helps us identify opportunities. So in the world today, carriers want to run towards areas that have a lot of freight. So you can bring up maps such as our outbound tender market share, and this helps identify opportunities. So understand when you look at maps to identify, we use these to find markets that we want to investigate. We use a map such as this to help identify this and our outbound tender rejects, and we want to use more than one index when we actually go in and investigate a market to understand that market fully. So this tool helps you find the markets, then we can dive in deeper and understand what's going on in that single market, and also be sure and check all the markets that surround the market that you're investigating to understand and make sure that a market that's east or west, north or south of you does not have an impact on your market. If you're looking at Little Rock, Arkansas, understand that Memphis is just to the east, and Memphis has a greater opportunity, has a large market share, and might draw capacity out of your market from Little Rock, Arkansas.
Thank you, Donnie. Well done. We've got a pinch hitter for you today, demonstrating the depth of our lineup. Our chief economist, Ibrahim Bayan, will be giving you a look from his economist perspective. Ibrahim looks forward to every event where I can say, you put 10 economists in a room, you're going to get 11 different opinions. So we look to our chief economist for that one very, very important analysis and perspective. Ibrahim.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you all for attending. I wanted to spend a little bit of time today talking about some of the trends in the labor market, which has been one of the sources of strength in the overall economy over the last couple of years. Job growth continued at a pretty solid pace over the past couple months, 263,000 jobs added for the overall economy last month, 450,000 roughly over the past couple of months. So everything looks pretty positive there. This is good news for the economy overall because it helps support retail spending, helps support housing activity, right? And it helps keep the economy moving in the right direction. A little bit of a different story when you drill into the numbers and look in the trucking industry, however, that 2018 was a really strong year for hiring within trucking. Almost 45,000 jobs were added within the trucking industry during the course of last year, but things have tailed off significantly over the past couple of months. You can see in the chart behind me that really over the past 3 months, only a total of 300 jobs have been added for the 3 months combined, right? So a real leveling off here. Now, normally this can happen for a couple of different reasons. One, it could be the demand is dying down, or it could be that you're going out and you're trying to hire, but you can't find enough people to add to payrolls. So the question is, how do you know, all right? Now, one of the ways you could look is to take a look at some of the demand drivers, and they've clearly downshifted. Manufacturing slowed down, export growth has slowed down, and that's reducing the demand. But the other thing is to take a look at some of the job openings data that's out there. In Sonar, we keep track of the number of job openings within the transportation and warehousing industry. And for a long period of time in the early part of last year, there were more job openings being posted relative to the number of jobs in the trucking industry than in the overall economy. But since then, it's died down considerably. Over the past several months, the job openings rate in transportation and warehousing has died down. It's fallen below the overall economy. This suggests that the appetite for hiring is a lot lower in transportation and that there's just not the same desire for hiring. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibrahim. Well done. So we're demonstrating that the breadth of Sonar, obviously, now we've gone from sort of that micro level, giving you some really nimble thoughts about what you should do today from our first three presenters, and Ibrahim's looking at some of the Sonar data more on the macro level. Now let's shift over to the perspective, obviously, of a commodity that is extraordinarily important in all modes of transportation into the world of oil, and our Sonar expert in oil, John Kingston. John?
Thank you. Everybody knows, if anybody who took Econ 101 knows that as the supply of something, as the price of something increases, the supply increases as well. And as the price of something increases, the demand for it drops as well. And in the middle of it, you get a match between those two lines that you did in Econ 101, and that was the price of the widget. Widget was always the product you used to do in economics class. So no smart guy could argue about, well, that particular market has a unique aspect, so nobody knew what a widget was. The problem in oil that's going on right now is that that's not working. And what you see over here in this chart is you see that nasty drop-off at the end there. That is the number of drilling permits in the United States that have been granted. This is not drilling activity. These are total drilling permits. The Baker Hughes rig count, as well as the Platts rig count, also is down. Now, why should that be? I mean, we all know how much the price of oil has risen. It's risen significantly. I believe it's a result of the banks starting to put a squeeze on the shale industry. The shale industry has never really operated like most industries. Normally, obviously, a startup economy is different, but if you're an established company, particularly producing a mature product, you're expected to make a profit, you're expected to generate free cash flow, you're expected to be able to kind of fund your further growth with that, and that really hasn't been happening in this industry. Free cash flow is, I won't call it rare, but it's sort of infrequent. Dividends are almost non-existent. And what's happening, I think, is that the banks are starting to say, you know what, we're not going to continue to finance a non-sustainable activity like shale drilling. So I think it's a concern. I think it's a concern for this industry because the rails haul frac sand, trucks haul frac sand. Activity in the oil fields is a very big driver of truck activity. And I think that drop-off in drilling permits is definitely something for this industry to be concerned about. But it's really kind of at the base of it, it's a really fundamental problem. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Much appreciated. And that bell, you were done. That bell does not count. He does not fall into the victim realm. Remember also, as I mentioned yesterday, that John is one of the co-hosts of FreightWaves Radio every Saturday from 3 to 5 Eastern Time. Road Dog 146, which I described as hard-coded in all of my vehicles and that I drive. So we're going to shift now for the next three market experts. We're going to shift modes very specifically, and we're going to cover the breadth of modality for you, and stepping up now, talking about intermodal trends and activities, Mike O'Brien. Mike?
Thank you. Today we're going to be looking at what's going on with intermodal rates. So as a backdrop in the dark green there, we're going to use the Cass Intermodal Price Index. That includes all costs to move the load, which include like line haul, fuel, accessorials, and it includes spot and contract rates. So to lay over the top to get a feel for what's going on with rates, two of the heaviest traveled intermodal lanes in the United States, LA to Chicago and Chicago to LA. You can see in the fourth quarter what was going on out there in LA, and the freight pull forward rates were going crazy, up over $250 a mile. And from Chicago back, they stayed pretty steady because people were pumping their equipment back out to back out to LA as fast as they could. But if you see the underlying green, the Cass index just keeps ticking up. Well, it's pretty steady. It's the last time the readings came in, the rates were at an all-time high. So contracted rates are remaining. People are holding them firm, which is a good thing. What that's telling me, and I don't know everything. The shippers are taking the short-term dip in volume, but they're going ahead and taking their medicine, not to let it mess up the long-term rates that they've worked pretty hard to get secured. So, a short-term dip in volume, don't let it tear down everything you built up over the last several years.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. So we've talked about rail, we've talked about intermodal. Let's shift now and move into air cargo. Those of you here yesterday, you met Jesse Cohen. Jesse has 25 years in the air and air cargo industry and uses sonar and provides analysis using sonar data around what's happening in the air cargo world. Jesse?
George, we have a little bit of a technical issue this morning. Need a little bit of help. I have a frozen laptop.
Oh, you got a frozen one? Okay. Go ahead.
So it's not pulling up the slide.
Okay. Is that going to work?
All right, that'll work.
Okay.
Great. So
Live
one of
sonar
our
demo.
newer sonar metrics measures U.S. truck waiting times for 17 different industries, including a separate breakout for air freight and logistics. This measures air cargo waiting times at 27 U.S. airports. That's the purple-colored line at on the chart. For comparison, we also measure seaport waiting times, which is the green line at 102, and the USA overall average, which is 146 right now. Air freight at 110 minutes is better than the USA industry average at 146 minutes, but still it's surprising that air cargo wait times haven't fallen off much this year from last year's fourth quarter peaks, when cargo volumes were much higher. Cargo volumes are lower now, but wait times remain stubbornly in the 100 to 125 range, certainly higher than last April and May. We drilled down into Atlanta for wait time data. That's the major Southeast air cargo industry gateway. There's a lot of air freight that's trucked in and out of Atlanta within a 250 to 500 mile range, and occasionally longer distances as well. Now, we found that Atlanta air cargo right now is pretty much in line with the airport wait time average, but exceeded those averages for most of last year. Wait time is a trucking industry issue that drives costs, lost opportunity for both trucking companies and drivers, and several factors contribute to the issue for air cargo. There's progress with new technology in Europe, and there's progress with new technology that's coming aboard in the United States. We'll be tackling the issue and looking into this in more detail and writing about this more with detail soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Jesse. Thank you for being as nimble and agile to be able to deal with a little bit of the technical difficulties. So we've done rail, we've done air. Now let's move into some boats. I'm pretty sure Henry would never call it a boat. Let's move into ships and maritime. Oftentimes, I talked about it yesterday, you don't typically have this kind of heavy hitter at the bottom of your batting order, but in our 8 slot, talking about maritime, Henry Byers. Hammer and Hank?
Thanks, George. So today I wanted to take a look again at the FreightWaves Baltic Index. It's the world's only daily index for container rates. And yesterday we looked at the Trans-Pacific eastbound, which is a head haul lane for ocean carriers between the China and the US. And today I wanted to take a look at the backhaul side of that equation, which is the US to China, and how those rates have been affected over the last year. Year over year, we're seeing East Coast rates switch China to the East Coast, obviously, up 52%. China to the West Coast, they're up 23%. But it's also worth noting that over the last month, so from a month-over-month perspective, East Coast rates are down 14%, and West Coast rates are down 7%. Now that's significant because I think ocean carriers are trying to achieve a greater balance between capacity and demand between China and the US as a result of this trade dispute, ongoing trade dispute, which hopefully I had asked our chief economist about the prospects of China showing up. He says that they're likely to show up, so fingers crossed on that one. But I also wanted to take a look at not only at how the trade disputes affected this lane, but also about the drought, the potential drought of the Panama Canal. The Panama Canal authorities actually come out and said that on May 28th, they're going to reduce the vessel draft size to 43 feet. So that's the depth that the vessel can actually extend into the water. Obviously, the more shallow that depth is, the lighter the vessels have to be, the less cargo they can carry. Capacity will tighten on that lane as a result, if that were to be the case. Another thing I wanted to show is a potential alternate routing between China and US East Coast. Obviously, the Panama Canal being the main route due to efficiency and time, but also the Suez Canal is a potential option. You'd be extending that by about 10 days. So it's a neat little feature in Sonar where we can monitor the weather.
So much information, we just couldn't fit it all into 2 minutes. So the good news is we're going to give you more market experts tomorrow in Daily Watch Live. So thank you, Henry, much appreciated. As you heard yesterday when Andy Clark and I had our conversation, Andy described that there's oftentimes inside of companies on the asset, non-asset, where, you know, they're, I think he said, one good hurricane, natural disaster, whatever, away from a good quarter. You don't ever want destruction, but that, you know, things happen. Nothing impacts transportation globally, domestic, North America, nothing more than the weather. And within Sonar, there's a lot of elements that we've gone well beyond simple and maps and the like, and have provided analysis through the chief meteorologist, Nick Austin. So as I said yesterday, it's a highlight of my career to be able to do this and see if I can do it well. Nick, having been a television meteorologist for a number of years, is going to grade me on how well I do this. So let's see how well I can do the handoff. So now, here's Nick with the weather.
Thank you, George.
Thank you, Nick.
And good morning, everybody. Yes, the weather has a large impact, we know, on freight movement, on transportation, and we have a great new feature in Sonar that I'm going to show you because, again, no big surprise, out in the plain states, we have another threat for severe thunderstorms and for tornadoes as well. Parts of Texas, Oklahoma, some other states as well. So what we're looking at here is the critical events feature, which can show you certain assets, like in this case near Amarillo, Texas, an oil refinery, as well as ports, rails, and even things happening in the Panama and Suez canals. This is data that's available worldwide. And it can show you which of those assets may be in a zone that is under any kind of severe weather threat, whether it's thunderstorms and tornadoes or whether it's blizzards in the winter. And this is particularly a ConocoPhillips oil refinery that is near Amarillo, Texas. And it is under a severe weather threat, possibly for maybe hail, wind damage, maybe even a tornado coming near the area. And this data shows you a forecast of how long that threat is going to last. And also you can look at the temperature and also precipitation, or wind forecast rather, out several days. We have another new index as well that's available in Sonar. Hopefully this will load up here in just a second. And you can look at an actual 24-hour precipitation forecast for rain or for snow. And in this instance, hopefully it'll pull up in a minute, but in just a second here, but Kansas City is expected to get a good amount of rain and possibly some flash flooding today. And if you do look at the forecast, it's showing that that area could receive about 3.5 inches of rain. It's a 24-hour forecast from midnight to midnight that you can check out each day to see which interstates, roads, which market could see the most rain and possible flooding.
Thank you, Nick. So thanks, Nick. Really appreciate it. I feel so much smarter every day when I read the Daily Watch. and having had the opportunity to share the market experts with you over the last couple of days, we'll do the Daily Watch Live again for you tomorrow. And as we are progressing this morning through our schedule, what you saw are the utilizations and the breadth from a geography and from a modality standpoint of the data that our data scientists are utilizing and our market experts are analyzing. So thank you to the market experts. Much appreciated. Thank you.